Good morning, everyone. We can see that there's a few people who are still joining at the moment, so we're just going to give it a minute or so longer, and then we'll get cracking. Okay, it looks like the majority of people have joined now. So welcome to this session on success with Teams, Telephony and Contact Centers. We will have a quick run through the agenda, and that looks like this. So we will have some introductions following this run through of the agenda. We will then go straight in with can we really use Teams for telephony? We'll look at the architectures available. We'll look at the migrating to Teams telephony. We will take into account some of the things that will make decisions on how this can work. We will have a Q&A session at the end of that. So if you have questions as we go through it, please put them into the chat window, and we will address them at the end. But it's a good time to get some practical advice on whatever it is that's concerning or worrying you, or if you need a steer. We will then move to the Anywhere 365 contact center component, where we'll hand over to our colleagues from Workstream People, and then they will give you a demo of that. There will be another Q&A, so again, please throw some questions in. And then we're looking to wrap up somewhere around the 10 to 12, quarter to 12 mark. Obviously, the more questions you throw in, the longer that may go on, but we've got some time in hand to play. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Richard Fisher, who's going to do some introductions and a lead in for the workshop.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pete. So good morning, everyone. Firstly, thanks for making some time to join us on this session. What I would imagine is a really quite a busy time for you guys. I've probably spoken to the majority of you on the call over the last couple of weeks, and yeah, it's I think it's a case of getting used to the new normal in these strange times. But I mean, one thing that we've seen is that Teams is becoming more and more business critical, and we've seen this over the last coming months, to be fair, and what we were hoping to do. So I was hoping to team up with Modality, which is what I've done today. But we were hoping to do a face-to-face session, and we'd actually got dates in the diary. We'd got venue organised, and then COVID-19 hit us. But what I wanted to do, given the uptake of Teams, is to really carry on with these sessions, but just to split them out into two sessions. So we've got one this week, and we've got one next week that you've got invites for. So, I mean, Microsoft Teams, it's seen exponential growth over the last 4 weeks, and I've got some facts that I've picked up, and then I'll just run through that are quite mind-blowing. We're currently seeing about 44 million daily active users. July last year, that figure was 13 million. November last year, that was 19 million. So you can see the growth that that we're seeing with that. On the 31st of March this year, we saw the most daily minutes, and we saw that 2.7 billion minutes in one day. And we're seeing 1,000% increase in video calling, and I see that in my day-to-day interactions with you as customers, that before the COVID-19 hit us, it used to be 80-20. 80% of the calls were just voice calls, and 20% we used to turn on the video. every now and then, but we're now seeing that the majority of calls have video cameras on, which I think is great, because although we can't see each other face to face, I think we're still in a virtual room together. So personally, I think that's great, because at least then there's some real interaction. Um, and I decided to really partner with Modality, because I've done some great work over the years in my roles within Microsoft, and they are the really de facto Teams go-to partner. So I want to leave you with Pete, who is going to take you through the first part of the session today. But I just want to call out before we go to Pete that at 11 o'clock we're going to be breaking for a minute's silence to pay tribute to the NHS people who've lost their lives in the coronavirus pandemic. So whatever's happening at 11 o'clock, I'll be interrupting you, and we'll just go on silent for a minute, and then we'll carry on. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Pete. And like he said, if there's any questions and answers, or if there's any questions, please pop them in the chat window, and I will ask those on your behalf at the end. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Pete, please. Thanks.
Yeah, and if you do have answers you want to throw my direction, I'm quite happy to accept them as well.
You know me better than that, Pete. There'll be no answers coming from me.
Cool. Thanks for that, Richard. Okay, so I think let's start right at the very, very basics. The question is, can we actually really use Teams for telephony? Is it properly ready? Well, the answer to that is very simply yes. We have deployed, I think, more Teams telephony seats than any other organization. We're doing it in some of the largest organizations on the planet. And actually, there are very, very few circumstances now where Teams cannot be used to deliver a telephony service. So let's break this through. First off, how have we reached the point that we're at now, and where are we heading to? In the world of technology, we know that things move very, very quickly. So if we look at, the first time that the proper telephony offering was delivered from the Microsoft stack, we're going back to Link 2010. Time moves quickly. That's now a decade ago. And since then, we've been building on functionality. The platforms have got slicker. They've become much more practical to use. And now, really, we are seeing a definite shift in the way that telephony is being treated. So there were, sort of back in the Link, Skype for Business days, major decisions about should we move away from a PBX and go to something like Skype for Business. That decision is now becoming greatly simplified, and part of that will be because when you start using Teams as a collaboration platform and you do internal calling, etc., it then just becomes a question of, well, why don't we just put telephony into it as well? The concerns that we've seen over putting telephony into the cloud also seem to be disappearing. There are one or two small organizations and sectors that like to keep control over their telephony, but even then, they're still basing it on Microsoft platforms. The other thing that we're seeing is that the usage of actual PSTN calling, the connecting to the public phone network, is also dropping, because most people are now starting to get into the realms of conversations over meetings, in federations, scaling up to voice and video calls. The actual PSTN usage is starting to become very much sort of reserved for I need to publish a telephone number so that people can contact my organization. So the external PSTN number that's facing citizenry and the one that's being put out there for primary contact. So the way that people are communicating, the way that they're interacting is very much shifting, and all of those things together are leaving the telephony as it's an important, you must have it, but the way things are going, people are changing much more. So we still need to provide telephony. It is certainly ready for use. And in beta at the moment, we have the likes of call recording, which we would expect to be out in the next few months. So moving on from there, how do we deliver telephony into Teams? Well, if we boil it down, there are two key ways of getting it in. Calling plans, which is where you would take your PSTN service from Microsoft. So you would sign up and say, I have X number of users, and they can sign up to the standard plan for domestic and mobile calling. And then other users who you might decide have a lesser need for minutes. But basically, if you think about it in the same way that you do your mobile, you get allowed to use a certain number of minutes, and it's all bundled together. And users who are on the same package can share minutes between themselves. And that is with Microsoft as your telco. So we can take that. We can also bring our own telcos into the conversation. And that can be done through direct routing. And direct routing is basically the provision of a session border controller, and we'll have a look at the architectures in a moment. And it might be hosted by a GCI or a pure IP or someone like that. It might be something that you put in Azure. It could be on premises, but fundamentally the architecture is the same. So when you drill it down, it's either yep, I'm going to take my telephony from Microsoft, or I'm going to take my telephony service from someone else, and I'm going to need to put this direct routing in place to service that. From the things that we need to note, the legacy PBX piece is going to be critical. If you're a large organization, which most of you will be, there may be a requirement to make sure that we have the ability to route calls between the two platforms as we go along. So that might have an impact of saying, actually, we want to go down the direct routing route. The Skype for Business Teams interop is also quite key. And we need to understand what the impact is going to be when you have some people on Skype and some people on Teams. So those will very much drive which sort of option we may well look for. The last point might seem fairly obvious to some of you, but actually what we want to call out is that there are a number of organizations who haven't been aware that the audio bridging services, the ability to dial into a meeting within a Teams meeting, is completely separate from delivering telephony. So in the old days of Skype for Business, I like that, the old days of Skype for Business, if you had a Skype for Business on-prem, then you could take one of your DDI numbers and you could turn that into a dial-in conferencing number. That's no longer the case. In the same way that it was with Skype for Business Online, and it is with Teams, you take any bridging services from Microsoft, and that's a subscription or a consumption model, depending on what you want to do. So those are the options. What do they actually look like? Well, I've been around Microsoft Unified Comms and collaboration for a long time. We used to draw some very complicated diagrams, and our diagrams are now really very simple. So if we're looking at calling plans, we have the Teams users within the Office 365 tenant. They get enabled for phone system, and because you're taking your architecture from, your telephony from Microsoft, that connects to the PSTN. And you assign numbers to the users and decide what calling plan they're going to sign up for. But there's nothing anywhere else. It's all within Microsoft. They provide your billing. So the architecture diagram is remarkably simple, which is great. When we come onto the direct routing, it becomes much more complicated diagram, he said, tongue in cheek. The Teams users are still in Office 365. We still have the phone system, which we would enable for those users. But instead of the PSTN connecting out through Microsoft, what we're doing is we're actually connecting to a piece of equipment called a session border controller, which used to be referred to as voice gateways, for example. And that is the component that will connect to the PSTN. So that would be potentially a SIP trunk coming in, or you may have some legacy ISDNs that you want to. connect into. But basically, your session border controller will be responsible for managing the phone ranges, etc. And if you do have any need with the on-premise solution to connect to any analog devices or third-party equipment or legacy PBX, then we can do that way. The other option is to take direct routing from a carrier. Now, the interesting piece about this is it's a separate defined sort of diagram within the Microsoft architectures that are supported. But the important point to point out is the direct routing that's provided by the carrier is effectively exactly the same that's on premises. It's just not you hosting it on your environment. It is provided by a GCI or a pure IP or whoever it is you decide to go with. So the architecture is exactly the same. The principle is exactly the same. And with these, we can combine, options. So we can have something on premise. We can look at deploying something through calling plans, etc., whilst we work towards getting it all into one particular architecture at the end. One of the challenges that we often get thrown at us is that Teams is not enterprise ready. It can't handle complicated environments. So I wanted to share with you, I've actually got permission from the client involved in this. This is an architecture that is live with one of our clients at the moment. And we have Skype for Business on-prem, we have Skype for Business online in the mix, we have Teams, we have a Verizon SIP service, we have Cisco hosted telephony platform, and we have an on-prem Mitel. And actually what we've got is a set of virtual SBCs in the mix, and they're providing connectivity to all of these environments. So when we say, yes, this really is ready to go and support an enterprise environment, we really are saying, yeah, do you know what it is? We've got it in live production environments. So I would quite happily grab a cup of coffee, and then with anybody who says that their environment is too complicated for Teams to handle, there are certainly ways of doing it, and at the moment we haven't yet come up with a situation which can't be resolved. So happy to talk those through. When it comes to the telephony experience for users, it's quite an interesting concept, because Link and OCS introduced the concept of contacting a person and not a number. This really has now taken it to the next level, and it's a concept I think we're all sort of quite familiar with. Whatever sort of media platforms we're using, we often just look at, I need to talk to Paul, I need to talk to Linda, whoever it may be. So the telephony experience, whether you're on the desktop, whether you're on the mobile, if you're working from home, if you're working in the office, it is consistent. The clients are very, very similar in the way that they look and behave. And what happens is, if you are receiving a call as a user, we're quite used to the little toast pop-ups, there's a little bit of music plays, and if we're on a desktop, we'll answer it, headphones on, you might have a Teams phone, who knows, but it's very simple. Call comes in, you answer it. If you're out on the mobile, it's exactly the same. A call comes in, it's the same as if you were receiving a GSM call, a normal mobile call. Obviously, it's a different sort of message that pops up, but it's got the answer and the reject. It's very, very simple. When you come to outbound calling from your mobile, yes, you can pick up your mobile and dial somebody's number, etc., or whatever it may be, but you can also just as easily open the Teams client, say, I want to talk to Paul, put in the call, and you're off and running. So what we're saying really is that the behavior when you start to use Teams properly and connecting people and saying, I'm going to do Teams to Teams call, Teams to Teams call, is that people are going much further into this contacting a person. When an external telephone call comes in to Teams, then fine, it lands on your mobile, it lands on your desktop, you answer it as normal. So the user experience is really quite simplistic. So how do we actually get you to Teams? The key things that are going to drive this is we need to come up with what your desired architecture is. So when we looked at the complicated diagram and the architectures previously, we need to look at the factors that are actually going to direct how we come up with the architecture. So things we need to consider are you using Skype for Business Server now? Are you using the online? Is it a legacy PBX that you're coming from? Whichever direction you're coming from, it might have a bearing on how quickly or whether or not we need to build something else into the architecture. So for example, if you're coming from PBX, it might be that you're of a size where we're going to need to put a session border controller on premise so that we can provide some sort of legacy ISDN connectivity to that PBX. It might be that you decide that you look at your number ranges connected to those PBXs, and we might be able to do number porting and batches of users at the same time. If you're coming from Skype for Business, do we need to put hybrid in place to be able to get your users to the cloud environment? So we need to look at where you're coming from. We also need to take into account compliance regulations. Now, we're looking at a number of organizations we work with in the financial sector to say, well, okay, from a compliance angle, we need to record calls. Now, we've got two options around here, really. The first option is, depending on how quickly organizations want to move, we have the Teams call recording, as I said, in beta at the moment. There's 12 clients globally that are on that program. It's looking very positive, and that will provide us the ability to provide call recording directly in the cloud. Whilst we're waiting for that to come down and go into GA, we also have the ability to do things like trunk side recording. So that will potentially define that we need to keep some sort of on-prem session border controllers in the short term. Many of the vendors around call recording are being very flexible around anything that's being purchased at the moment, because we have this direction for cloud functionality later. So we do need to look at those compliance regulations. As yet, as I said, we've not hit an organisation that we can't meet. And also, as we get to talk onto the workstream people anywhere 365 conversations, there are also ways that we can do call recording within that environment as well. And this will come down to how highly regulated your environment needs to be. We also need to look at the call features and call behaviour. This really is a piece of sort of background information for you as you're going through planning out your trip to Teams, because in the same way that we saw with people moving from PBXs into this Microsoft architecture, it was, well, I've got a phone and it does this and it does that and it does that, and Teams and Skype for Business, Skype for Business, they can't do that. And actually, when you start to look at how people interact with their telephony, what you quite often find is that they make a call, they receive a call, they put it on hold, they'll transfer it to someone, they'll access voicemail, and then they start to run out of things that they might want to do with it. So actually, the way that people interact now has greatly changed, from 10 years ago. So we do want to have a look at the features and behaviors that are being used now, and we do want to take into account what's going to actually be impacted when we go to Teams, because more often than not, a lot of the stuff that's perceived to be really important actually isn't important. The ISDN piece, existing contracts. If you're looking at how you're going to provide your PSTN access, if you've got ISDN contracts in place, when do they expire? Can we talk to the vendor, the telco that you're using, and say, actually, what we really want to do is swap over to SIP. Would that be okay? Can we renegotiate the contracts, etc.? And when we look at that kind of legacy piece, we could take into account, analog devices, things that need to remain in place potentially for lifts, emergencies, etc. Do those need to be part of that that future architecture, or do those analog services, for example, just reside as plain old telephony lines? So all of these things will direct us to whether or not you can actually go big bang, just take all your users to the cloud in potentially one hit, or whether or not you're going to need to do this in a staggered event. The other thing that we would need to take into account is if you are going for the bigger bangs, it's technically possible. Quite often what we need to look at is how your service desk will react to having a whole load of users cut across to Teams telephony in one go, and whether or not that can be supported. The other thing that we need to take into account is, what is your strategy? Where do you want to get to? Do you have it fixed in your head that you absolutely want nothing on premise, it's completely cloud service, and we are happy to have that delivered by somebody else or by Microsoft or whatever? Or is it a case of you're not actually bothered because you've already got some sort of data center set up, maybe in a couple of different geographic locations, in which case actually just hosting a couple of session border controllers doesn't really make much difference to you. So we need to understand what you want to achieve with that. We are finding that more and more organizations are saying, I just want a cloud service. I don't really care whose cloud it is, just a bit of a case of not in my land, not on my land. So we can do that. We have organizations who have gone completely to Microsoft. We have organizations where we host everything else for them, so they're still getting that cloud effect, but they're not actually servicing anything on-prem themselves. We also come back to making sure that if we're moving people away, especially from legacy PBX, that we make sure that we're not just trying to map what they have now onto the way they will work. We want to encourage them and show them that actually, yes, this is moving into Teams. Teams is, a far bigger application, and these are all the good things that you can do with it in addition. So we want to make sure that we treat the functionality as a futures thing, not just looking at what they currently have. And part of that is reevaluating how people communicate with each other. Richard has just said that usage of video is up 1,000%. If we've had organizations that are used to just picking up a phone and dialing an extension, this is going to be a change away, because your communications lead themselves within Teams, not just to telephony, but also much more to video. So we do need to look at those kind of factors as well to see how that's all going to pan out. Something that is super important is keeping in mind the wider Teams program. The Teams programs that we are seeing now, people are pushing ahead, especially with the COVID response. They've pushed it out as an internal tool. Yep, go ahead, use it, communicate, collaborate. It's absolutely great. We do need to keep in mind that whatever happens in that project of widening out the collaboration, etc., to your user base, if that's not done with a certain level of control and efficiency, and it's kind of a bit of a, have a go, see what happens, we're taking telephony into that environment. So if that environment hasn't been dealt with correctly, and there's many ways of rolling out Teams, you're potentially taking the telephony that users are comfortable with and putting it into a product which, if it's been rolled out badly, they may be getting frustrated with. So we do need to keep an eye on that additional section of what's going on. But generally, we are seeing now more and more that telephony is being hooked to Teams, and seeing as much more of a single product. Whereas I think in the earlier days it was very much a case of I'm not putting my telephony service into a Teams product or anything like that. The mindset has shifted from telephony as an isolated item, and it's very much a case now, as I said, these things are coming together. We want to make sure that we do things in the right order, because that can have quite a big impact on how you roll this out. If we are rolling out chat and meetings and collaboration, and people are working quite happily as they have done with this, the COVID response, then actually, if people are talking to each other and setting up video calls and having internal calling, moving telephony into it becomes really simple, because actually all they're doing now is receiving a call and making a call. So by the time you've got simplified architectures in the background, and the time you've got the fact that you're just adding in this ability to make and receive an external call, it becomes very, very straightforward. If you need to bring contact center into the mix, it's the right time to bring it in is with the telephony. It's no longer this, as I said, this separated items. If you are taking telephony into a Teams environment that nobody else can do anything else in, then you just need to be aware that you're taking somebody potentially from a PBX or Skype for Business, and you're changing the tools, and you do your adoption and change management accordingly. But with that, they will then also be looking at their Teams client going, well, what's all this other stuff? So it will depend on where you are. The key point around minimizing disruption is going to come down to whether or not we actually want to go down number porting, big bang, let's get it done as aggressively and as quickly as possible, or whether or not we want to actually phase this out. If we're going down the number port, obviously then there's potentially much greater preparation up front, because we need to have everything in the right place, everything sorted, ready for that number port to take place. You then end up with a short period of disruption as people come in and go, oh yes, I'm not using this today, I'm now using Teams, versus whether or not we actually keep legacy call routing between the old platform, wherever you're coming from, and Teams. If we go through that phased piece, we need to be much more conscious of what the interrupt scenarios are. If you've got half your organization on Skype for Business and half on Teams, we need to make sure that within that adoption and change management story, within that education piece, we are talking about, this is the behavior if you're trying to contact someone on Skype. This is the behavior as you're trying to contact somebody on Teams. This will work. This bit behaves in this way. So you just need to make the users aware. If you don't get that message across to them and say, this is what's happening during the transition phase as we go from one to another, then potentially you've got some frustrations could build, etc. So we just need to be clear and say, yeah, okay, we're going to do it on number port. This is going to be the impact to the users, and then from Monday morning you start with this. Or yeah, we're going to have it phased. Some people are going to be on Skype, some people are going to be Teams. This is how it works. This is how it works if you want to talk to somebody, etc., etc. And the different sort of mode that we roll out, whether it's islands modes or Teams only mode, etc., will be something that drives how we get that messaging across. And lastly, before I hand over to Paul, I think the main thing here is don't overthink it, don't overcomplicate it. It's all perfectly possible, and we can certainly do it. So that's the Teams piece. Let's go on and have a chat. I'm going to hand over to Paul Morgan now, who's the account director for public sector, to talk through a bit about what we've done.
Okay, thanks, Pete. So yeah, good morning, everybody. Just really wanted to put up a slide. I guess it's by no means an exhaustive list, but it just gives you a flavour, really, of the types of public sector organisations that we've done business with in the past. And as you can see, there's a fair cross section of companies there. I'd say, our largest customer is Kent County Council, where they've got a 10,000 user Skype deployment that we were in control of migrating and managing that process. But we've also done deployments for 50 user schools. So the types of services tend to vary, around the professional services base, like consultancy, project management, and user adoption and change management. So there's a bit of a mix, but no, I think we're fairly proud of that customer base. But just in terms of what's topical today, homing in on one particular customer, like just to bring your attention to the Hyde Group. If you want to advance the slide, Pete. Okay, yeah, Hyde Housing. There are about 1,500 users over about 10 locations. But interestingly, they came out with an RFP a couple of years ago now, and at the time it was quite revolutionary. They wanted a unified comms solution, as a service with nothing based on-prem. So a complete cloud scenario. But that also needed to factor in a 200 seat contact center environment. So yeah, we came up with a design. We worked very closely with the workstream guys and on the Anywhere 365 contact center solution. We put this solution in with a hosted provision, and then provided a managed service to back it up. So that's been live now for just over a year, and Hyde have been extremely happy with it, and are very happy to act as a reference customer for us. So please bear that in mind. I think the other thing that we've seen with another couple of customers during this COVID-19 period is that they've accelerated their deployment plans because they've wanted to get their contact center users set up from home so that they can work seamlessly and with no disruption of service to citizens, etc. And we've seen that recently with a county council where we've actually stood up 13 contact center instances in the last 3 weeks in order to provide that seamless connectivity for the agents. And that has it's really been done extremely well. Callers, citizens calling in haven't noticed any difference, and again, that's probably moved their deployment forward 6 months quicker than they would ordinarily have planned. So I guess that's fairly indicative of what we're seeing in the market at the moment. So happily provide any further information if there's a particular scenario that anyone wants to have a look at. So I'll hand back to Pete, if I may.
Great. So we're at 10:40, which was the time that we were due to do some Q&A. So Richard, are you around, and have you got any questions for us?
So Pete, thanks very much for that. We've had no questions come in so far. I'm hoping that's because you've gone into things in so much detail. But a couple of questions, I think, from me that I get asked quite a lot from customers. People have had DDI numbers for years. How easy is it really to take those to Teams in a in a cloud perspective, in a cloud scenario, and are there any limitations to this? I mean, I've seen things like 0845, 0345, the non-geographic numbers. Can those be taken? It'd be good just to get your view on that.
Yep, absolutely. So with taking a numbers across, the short answer again is yes. It's always yes. We're a consultancy, right? So yes, you can take DDI numbers across, whether they're non-geographic numbers or whether they're regional, makes no difference from a technical perspective. So if we have a carrier, let's say it's PGI, and we want to take those numbers across to Microsoft, because of the way that, and again, similarly with mobiles, you need to be able to have the option to take your number with you. If we port numbers across from pure IP and take it into Microsoft, those DDI ranges will come across. All we need to do is make sure that the numbers that are assigned to the users within the tenant match correctly with the numbers, the range that we're expecting. And what we do, especially on the sort of the porting piece, is we say, yeah, we've got these 1,500 users, these are their DDIs, we're going to map those into the tenant so that we're ready for it. And then at the point that the port takes place from telco A to Microsoft, for example, the platform is ready to expect those numbers coming in, and basically everything lights up like a Christmas tree. The main thing that we have to watch out when number porting is that we can only go by complete ranges. So we have something in the background called a Cupid ID, which basically says you've got this group of 500 numbers, this group of 1,000 numbers, this group, etc. All of those will go in one hit. So if you have 1,000 users, say, assigned to 1,000 DDIs, then potentially you will be doing all of those in one go. If you take the direct routing route rather than the number porting, and potentially you're going to go from solution A to solution B, if you've got DDIs and we've already got that telephony coming into that session border controller, then all we're really doing is saying that user is no longer on the PBX. They're now up in Teams. So when that call comes in and it's destined for Richard, it will basically be flicked off up to the cloud. And that way the numbers get retained. So keeping numbers, absolutely.
Great. Thanks for that. I knew there'd be a nice straightforward answer there, Pete. So another question I get asked quite a lot is about functionality, because there's always this this thought that the cloud version of a lot of the telephony hasn't got the features and functionality like other PBXs. Other PBXs have hundreds and hundreds of different functions available to organizations, but just things like hunt groups and things like manager secretary. Can you still do that on Teams? And does it work just as well on Teams as it does on a normal PBX?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to the answer on that. Is well, first of all, we do use different language, but yes, that relationship is definitely there. The main thing that we need to do is where we have people who have that PA exec relationship or something like that, is whatever platforms they are on, they always need to be on the same one. So you can't leave a PA on Skype for Business whilst the exec gets moved to Teams, for example. The advanced call distribution functionality, we need to look at. There's an awful lot that is available natively. So we can do cloud call queues, we can distribute calls, we can route things as we particularly want to. Calls coming in for a boss can be picked up by the PA, etc. That is all there, fully functional. It's great. If you potentially have something that is more complicated, then you have the ability to use something like the Anywhere 365 contact center, not necessarily because you're deploying a contact center, but because actually what you want to do is have that more advanced control level. And then there's absolutely nothing really that you can't do the call distribution wise. So it's a basic principle of when you're looking at what that call distribution and behavior is, we first of all try and fulfill that natively within the Teams environment. And it's, as I said, it's been around quite a long time now. It's just hosted in the cloud. you have the auto attendance, you have the cloud call queues, you can take your own number into one of those clouds. It doesn't need to be a Microsoft number, etc., etc. So there's lots and lots of functionality there. I would say, the amount of organizations that we deal with, there's very few that end up falling onto the, to the contact center to fulfill gaps. Contact center is generally there to fulfill the contact center environment. But yes, so even if there was to be something peculiar that came out of the woodwork, which we did have for a home builder last year, it can be fulfilled. But I have to say that their requirement was somewhat extreme.
Okay, but that's good to know that the majority of organizations' requirements
and I think, let's just add on to that despite us, getting that glowing reputation or recommendation at the beginning, despite us being sort of relatively small headcount wise, we deal with organizations up to 230,000 seats,
right? Okay.
On a global basis. So we have very, very complicated environments and very highly regulated environments.
Right.
And as yet, we've not come across anything that we can't do.
Okay, but that's quite an interesting challenge actually there, Pete, because certainly I think a lot of people on the call will be either in the regulating space or some of the more secret or secure space within government. So it would be good to just to get that out on the table and just start to look at the requirements there. But thanks for that. We've had one question in which I think will probably fall neatly into the next space actually. So the question is, I assume the answer is yes, but is there functionality for customer service teams, call queuing, call monitoring, and reporting? And this probably is on the team side and on the next stage as well, the ACD side.
Yeah, so just read that one to me once more again, just to make sure I've got the.
Is there functionality for customer service teams, i.e. call queuing, call monitoring, and reporting?
Yeah, so they were right in their presumption. The answer is yes. So, an awful lot of organizations will use the native teams call queuing to distribute calls, on a sort of relatively sort of basic level, saying, yeah, this is my IT service desk or customer service desk. Whether it's internal or external doesn't really matter too much. Teams natively is not a contact center. It has some functionality for that distribution of calls and queues, and we can do that. And because there's an awful lot of data that is stored within Teams, you can get a lot of good information. But if you are running a service desk off of it, and Andy from Workstream People will go into this. One of the things that's most important to organizations who are running customer services from it is having access to the information of how things are working, how successful, who's performing, who's not performing. Have you got somebody who's part of a call queue who's actually just not answering any calls? Mm-hmm. So the information management becomes very, very important. If you want it for simplistic, can I have it as a service desk internally? Can I do this and the other? Then the answer is absolutely yes, we can do it.
Okay, thanks for that. And one last question before we go over to Andy. I deal with some customers who are finance related, and therefore they need call recording. Can that be done on Teams?
So this is what we were saying as we went through the deck. There are 12 clients who are currently on a beta to have or Teams call recording. So there's an API that's going to work with the likes of Verint to be able to do the level of call recording that a financial regulated body would expect. And that's looking really positive. And that will all be run from Azure, and there's some bots that hook into to get that recording data and make sure it's all compliant. So the scene is looking very good for that. We have other organizations that work in the financial sector who have said, yeah, actually Teams is really important to us. We need to get it out there very, very quickly. We know that the beta isn't gone into GA yet. So actually what we're going to do is use something like, again, Verba or something like that, Variant Verba, to capture trunk side, which will keep us going whilst we're in this transition phase. So there are options around it. You know, if you do need the all singing, all dancing, capturing all the internal calls, you know, then we need that beta to move into GA for that to really, really work. But the short answer is yes, we can. It does come down to how you interpret the regulations and compliance.
Okay, but again, it's worth a conversation just to go through requirements and what can be done, what can't be done, both now and going forward. So
yeah, so we're in, you know, we work with high street banks, we work with VC, we work with investment organisations, hedge funds, we work with you know, the likes of you know, the sort of the Schroders, the you know, the markets, the trading, all this sort of stuff. So there's an awful lot of regulation that goes on in those bodies, which we can certainly bring to the table here.
okay, thanks, Pete. I think that concludes the questions for this part.
Okay, so I'm now going to, I've just realised I've put the Q&A slide after the introduction to Workstream People. So I'm going to hand this over to Andy Whiteside now from Workstream People. And he will obviously go through the Anywhere 365 and do a demo alongside it. I think before I do hand over to him, there's a lot of, shall we call it, misinformation around Teams and contact centers. We find that there are a number of people who say that they can do contact centers within Teams, and we have a number of relationships with various different vendors. It's worth taking due diligence to find out what that integration actually looks like, because some of it is not all as it's cracked up to be. This is one product where we feel it is completely workable. We've deployed it into a number of customers, and it certainly, for us, delivers what we need it to deliver. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you. Thanks, Pete. Appreciate the good comments. We've done a lot of work actually over the last 12 months or so since I've been here to try and help those customers in that migration plan. So let me just make sure. Can you see my screen? You guys seeing that okay now? So I'm conscious we need to stop at 11. So could somebody just make sure that you shout to me so I do? I'll probably get a little tangent.
6.5 minutes.
So we'll try and do a very high level positioning piece, and then I like to get into a demo quickly so that we can show you a bit more about what it's all about and how it fits and works. So I'll quickly go through some positioning slides just to show you where we sit. But Anywhere 365 is a product from Workstream People. We're a Dutch organisation. I saw this product about 3 years ago in my previous role, and I ran a UC practice for a value-added distributor. Really liked what I saw, but couldn't quite get the commercials to work out. Needless to say, I liked it that much that I'm now building the UK business for them. I've been here just over 12 months. It's been a baptism of fire, I suppose. It's been an interesting time. I think it was busy prior to the COVID environment, but we've really been super busy in trying to get customers mobilised and enabling that transition of the workforce from an office-based role to working at home and being able to provide those same services that you would expect that you needed to be able to provide whilst working in a difficult time from almost anywhere. So we are mostly known for contact centre. We coin a phrase enterprise dialogue management, and that really means that we've tried to disrupt the market slightly. So typically a contact center was a fairly expensive bit of software, and it was the preserve of the customer service teams really and that allowed them to sort of get some knowledge about their inbound callers. What we've tried to do is to say, look, actually, if we flip this on its head, could everybody in the organisation utilise that type of technology if cost wasn't a problem? And we believe the answer is yes. And I think any dialogue that you have with your clients, the public, patients, whatever they may be, then we could put some controls that would really benefit those businesses. So that's our terminology in terms of enterprise dialogue management. We started out life in the SES and the Link days, and done quite a lot of work in the Skype for Business on-prem and online. And pretty much every conversation we have today is about Teams and how we can mobilise customers on that journey. Okay, so in terms of what we provide, contact centre is the obvious one. So we've got lots of referenceable customers globally that can have highly available, resilient contact centres with all the different modalities you would expect in a modern contact centre. But because of the way that we license, we can then roll those out to back office teams, to global service desks, to maintenance teams, to accounts functions that might still want some controls and some reporting and recording, but don't need that full-blown contact center experience. We also provide an attendant console, so for receptionists, again, that works across the Microsoft stack. The majority of what we do is that enterprise routing piece, so getting a call or an email or a text or whatever it might be to the right agent with the right skill in the quickest possible time. And we want to be able to record and report on all of that journey, which is even more important now we've got a mobile workforce. We also, because we've done a lot of work in the public sector generally, realised that we're all trying to do more with less. So whilst we can make agents more productive, ultimately, being able to self-serve and provide complementary self-serve technologies is really where we're seeing the best ROIs and the best way to sort of to reduce your total cost of ownership. And then we want to introduce those newer technologies that the public want to be able to communicate you with. I won't go through all of these. There's some logos of our global customers. We don't say that we have a specific vertical. So in terms of who we work with, there's a bunch of different vertical markets that we've done. UK wise, we've done a lot of work with Microsoft actually last year in the local regional government space, and trying to show those customers ultimately that we can use Teams, and we can get rid of the myth that actually we can't move to Teams because we haven't got all of the integrations to sort of legacy products that we're reliant on in our businesses. So the only thing that pulls all of these logos together really is that they're all using Microsoft as their telephony platform. So this could be Skype or it could be Teams, and those are really the sort of the pull together that we've got on this particular slide deck. Just to show you some of the UK customers, this is growing pretty rapidly. We almost could do with a daily update on some of these, but we've got a bunch of different verticals that we cover, from education through to the NHS, which we've got probably 5 or 6 different opportunities with. Paul mentioned earlier on, we've probably been mid POC with a few of modalities clients, and actually we've been able to really help facilitate those customers through those periods to take advantage of the technology, allowing them to be more mobile and agile. I think we're almost getting to the 11 o'clock mark, so I'll very quickly go through this slide. But we've got 3 component pieces to our solution, and we hook in completely to the Microsoft ecosystem. So we've got the application itself, and that could have resided in a number of different places, but normally that's consumed as a consumption model with Teams. And then there's 2 other components really. We provide customers with a template that will sit in their own SharePoint environment. So again, taking advantage of the 365 licensing, but that's where all the administration and configuration is done. And then from a database perspective, we have an instance of SQL, which again is the customer's instance, and that can reside locally or in Azure, and that provides all the management information, and that's where all the CDR records are. Really, if you look at this slide, we look at the left-hand side as being all of the different omni-channel contact options. So that's
Andy, I'm just going to pause you there.
Yeah, sure. No problem.
We're just coming at the 11 o'clock mark.
All right, no worries.
We'll just have a minute's silence to pay tribute to to all the NHS people who've lost their lives in the corona pandemic. Thanks everyone for that. That was great. Thank you very much. So Andy, I'll pass back over to you.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, so just going back to this slide. So really where this fits in is we're looking at the left-hand side of the screen in at the different options that people would like to communicate with nowadays. That used to be the preserve of email and probably voice for the majority of business-to-business type communications. But if you're providing services to the general public, they like to use the tools they use in their personal life with their service providers. So that could be, a myriad of different tools, but a lot of the socials we see, Facebook Messenger, Twitter, WhatsApp, as well as the traditional SMS, voice, and email methods. What we then do is allow you to manage those call flows within an instance of SharePoint that gives you much more control, gives you a much easier interface than some of the legacy platforms that you'll have been used to. And within that, we can start to apply some business rules. So we can look at machine learning. Let's find out what our callers are doing. Do we want to build some skill sets of agents that that are best suited to take certain inbound dialogues? Is it do we have a record in a back office system, an ERP or a CRM system, or an ITSM tool that we might be able to give the agent a little bit more information about what that inbound call is about? It could be that we, from a contact card within Dynamics, for example, we have a VIP listed, so a contact card that's got a tag on it, and within that record, we could on the fly make different choices dependent on the status of those individuals. So maybe vulnerable, at-risk patients. It could be a VIP caller, and that VIP caller could be tagged, and then we could say, actually, if there's a longer wait time, maybe we don't want them to follow that path, and we can take them on a different route, and even make a call out to a supervisor on their mobile phone, for example. What I really liked when I saw this product was the ability to be able to overlay other services, so bespoke specialist services that you could procure through your Azure subscription services. So things like bots, for example, we can integrate into the contact center. One of the logos on a previous slide was DHL. They initially used our software for web chat only, and when you hit their website, you'd hit a bot, and they would try and transact that initial inquiry by its built database and figure out what most people were looking for answers for. When that bot got exhausted, then it got escalated into a live chat with a web agent. Now, traditionally, those agents would have been sort of limited by the language that they would have dealt with. But now we can start to overlay those other services. So translation services are a great example of global organizations trying to use that type of technology. So an inquiry that maybe came in the Netherlands and the Dutch-speaking guy wants to speak in Dutch, but the agent skills were only available in Italian or Spanish, for example. We wouldn't have been able to facilitate that chat previously, whereas now that translation can be done by the overlay of those Azure-based services. It might be that we want to have look at some cognitive services. What's the sentiment of a call? Is the language being used a bit choice? Are we shouting? Are we getting irate customers? Could we use that to initiate a process from an agent's perspective to deal with an awkward customer? And those types of things. So we believe that those services are best served by the specialists that produce them, rather than a contact center provider. but bringing them into the contact center as and when you need them for the people that need it is the most efficient way to be able to deliver those services. We're also seeing live spoken translation. We did a demo for a partner last week, which was for a Japanese airline, and they wanted their agents to take international calls, but they didn't want to reskill those agents with all the different languages that they would deal with. So spoken translation is a bit more complicated. It's probably not quite as enterprise ready as the text-based chat, but actually it's going to be those service providers that put the R&D into that rather than a separate provider. I've done some work with some call analytics software in the past where we can identify, what's happening in calls, for example. And then what we need to also be able to do is to look for, a tooling set that's going to be familiar to everybody. So again, we can provide all of our stats and our data into SQL Server reporting or Power BI and use that as your tooling to be able to monitor and manage your contact center in that way. So both real time and historically. If we think about the agent experience, this can be at its most simple, just a call into the Teams client. So we could deliver a voice call without any extra software, just to the basic Teams client. We might want to extend that out to include a timeline or some CRM information, so that the agents from within the Teams client can see a bit more history and what's happening, within that account that they've got for that particular caller. So we can see timeline information, we can see open tickets, we can see some history, what's happened, and what the general feeling is for that customer. What we're seeing a lot more of is the move into the CRM space. So power workers that sit in an ITSM or a CRM system and want to have that contact center capability built in to their single pane of glass, which is where they sit and reside from a daily perspective. So and then obviously we can do that standalone, so we don't have to sit in any of those and just do it through a browser, or we can provide PSTN services to people on their mobile phone or on an online number. We built this bridge app it was actually built for a sales organization that wanted to, they believed the best way to answer a call was to put it through to their account managers. But those account managers were mobile and they didn't sit at their desk waiting for calls. They were out and about, and they wanted a similar experience to their Teams client and their CRM system integration, but from their mobile phone or their smartphone. So this is really, building that picture together is applying some logic. We're trying to reduce the amount of unnecessary dialogues. We're trying to utilize any intelligence we've got to best route a call to the best place, whilst maintaining the efficiency of the agents in the process. And then if you think about how our system builds, we've got a bunch of different tools. We've got some wallboards that allow us to see what's happening real time. So I'll show you those in the demo. We'll also look at the different views that the agent can get, and then all the different modalities that you could include as part of this. If you provide an app to your customers, we can also include those media streams as ways into the contact center. So if you wanted to have an app where you could go and check on some statuses, but then have a conversation with an agent, and then we could do that through a chat or a call. I think the two main areas really for us are the reporting, the way in which you can pull reports out, and then the way in which you can manage the day-to-day operation of your contact center. So that's done for slides. I'm going to go and jump into a demo for you, if that's okay. And I think usually the best way to show you this is to almost make it into a real life scenario. So let's just show you the view into our contact center. So this is a view of our wallboard. Here has got some pretty basic information at the moment. We've got a bunch of teams. We've got some pretty empty call stats areas in the center of the screen, and then we can see some high-level information about how our contact center is doing, how many calls we've accepted, how many we've missed, what our average queue times are, and then whether we're hitting our SLA or not, and how many agents we've got available. So we don't charge for the wallboards. This is an app view, and you can toggle between different views that you might want to experience for different teams, and depending on how you license this, then we can have different views per contact center, and that the information that you surface is going to be relevant to those teams and how they want to see it. Okay, so that's the view of the wallboard. We do have a web version as well, which again you can present in a number of different ways. I can see actually I've got one of the agents in my other contact centres is in a call at the moment, and again you can present this information to an HTML browser that might be presented on whatever device that you want. So this is my demo environment. UCC is Anywhere 365 terminology. That's a unified contact center, and is my demo environment. And in this area at the top, I can see a little bit about my contact center. So I've got 23 agents, 3 supervisors, a bunch of trainers and trainees. I've got some skills. We can also do outbound campaigns. So that outbound campaign could be something we've generated from our CRM system. In effect, it's a list in SharePoint, and that list in SharePoint has to have 2 things as a minimum: the number that we want to call, and then the skill of the agent that's going to deal with that outbound call once it's connected. At the UCC level, we can determine things like opening times. So you would if you have different opening times for different departments, you would normally separate those by different contact centers. You'd also do different reason codes and those sorts of things at UCC level. We can also upload a list of all of our holidays for the 12-month period, so that automatically all of our call answering is dealt with without having to have any human intervention. And then we can, at the high level, show you, some missed calls and voicemails, those sorts of things. But everything else that we do is managed through this toolkit we've got here. So I thought what we'd do from a demo perspective, and see how we're doing for time, I'll build a small department. We'll add an agent, we'll put some calls through, and then show you what the experience looks like. So for me, this is a big, powerful message for us. We think that owners of contact centers, or the contact center call flows, should be in control of those environments. And I think because we're going to manage this through your own SharePoint environment, those roles and responsibilities have already been defined. One of the big things we found in public sector was, just being able to change a greeting at the front end. So, we all know that when our bins don't get collected, that can be a bit of an emotive subject. So we've done a lot of work in the local regional government space, where just being able to control some of the actions of the contact centre dynamically would really help. So if a bin wagon had broken down and we wanted to deflect a load of inbound calls away from our agents, we could do that by just changing a simple setting in the call flow. Thanks for calling. If you're calling about your bin not being collected today and you're calling from this postcode area, don't worry about it. We know about it. The bin wagon broke down. It's going to be collected on Wednesday. And automatically you can deal with the load on your contact center agents by being a little bit more proactive. So what I thought we'd do is we're gonna build a little department, and I'm gonna choose one of the registrations on here. So let's build a new one. If I can type this morning. So we're going to build a new team, and I'm going to show it on the wallboard. And now I'm going to add a new agent to my team. So the idea of this is just to give you an idea of how quickly and simply we can build up how our system looks. So Pete, are you still on the call? Hopefully he's just muted. But I'm going to add.
Yes, can't unmute myself. Sorry.
Can I use you as my guinea pig, Pete? Can I make you an agent in my contact center?
Yeah, just turning myself to available, because otherwise I won't get through.
Cool. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you that actually we could have agents in our contact center that might be at reach agents, or there might be other areas within our organization, but we could be federated with them. And actually we can use those agents within our contact center. So we'll go back to that in a little while, but I can make Pete a formal agent, or I can make him informal. Basically we just need, when he logs in, he can become part of our formal contact center, or he can act on behalf of a number of different of teams if he so wishes. So all I need is Pete's SIP address. So I've got his SIP URI. I can also determine if Pete is a part-time employee or he's a contractor or something. We can tell you which days he works and which times. I won't do that on this particular one. So, and now what I need to do is allow Pete to take calls on behalf of the pensions regulator. So let's go and do that through here. So I'm going to choose my new team. I'm going to make Pete 100% skilled. So what this allows you to do is to build up a skills matrix. So you might have different skills for the levels of experience of each individual agent, and you could use that in a number of different ways. What we might do here is say we want to add a KPI or an SLA that we want to answer calls within 2 minutes, for example. And within that 2 minutes, we might say for the first 30 seconds, I'm only going to hunt agents that are 100% skilled in whatever they've called about. So this is what we could do here. After 30 seconds, if we don't get answered, then maybe we want to drop that skill down. So we could open the audience a little bit wider, and we could then go and search for agents that are maybe 80% skilled in the pensions regulator. Utilities like this, because they get fined if they don't answer calls in a certain time frame. So what they like to do is almost before they get to the KPI limit, they'll drop the skill down to 0, and they don't really care as long as the call's answered. Who answers that call? They can take a message, or they can put it through to a back office function. So what have we done? We've added a new department, and that department should now be on my wallboard, so it's automatically uploaded to the wallboard. I've added a new agent. Now Pete doesn't work for me, he works for Modality Systems, but because we're federated between our two organisations, he can actually take calls on our behalf, and I've allowed him to do that through adding the right skills for it. So what I haven't done yet is change the call flow. So I'm going to go in and just show you how we can change the IVR, so I can see graphically what my current setup looks like. Come through to the main menu. When we're open, we get a welcome message, and then I've got a few different options here in terms of how that might look graphically. I can also see when we're closed, we go to a close message, and then we go to an overflow from there. But if I want to make changes to this, I go back into the template, and I can make some quick changes to the IVR. So here, I'm going to just change some stuff around. I'm going to use the text-to-speech engine. You probably wouldn't use this in real life. You might get this recorded and then uploaded in a professionally recorded voice or the voice of the organization. It's good for demos though, so we are recording these messages. So this contact center it has got call recording enabled, and if we need to announce that, we can through here. I can also determine what happens when we're closed, what happens when we go into an overflow, and in this particular one, I'm going to change one of the options so that we can add our new team. Here we go, let's choose the right skill. My eyes aren't working today. Right, so there we go. So that's taken me about 5 minutes to add a new agent, add a new department, allow that agent to take calls for that department, and then change the call flow so that it reflects that in its entirety. So that's pretty good. Most change control processes I've seen so far are about 2 weeks. I think the worst one I saw was about 6 weeks. So let's do what you should never do, is put a live call into a demo. So I'm just going to call my UCC from my mobile phone. See the call pop into the screen.
Welcome to the pensions regulator. This conversation will be recorded for training purposes. Press 1 for team support. Press 2 for the pensions regulator.
I'm going to press 2.
Press 3. You have chosen the pensions regulator.
Okay, so you can see that's my choice. Trying to connect to an agent. hopefully Pete's, there you go. Hello, Pete.
Hello.
Awesome. So you can see now we've got a call connected. That's my agent. We chose the pensions regulator, and then this is the time that we've been connected for. Thank you. Pete, could you hang up for me?
Please rate the quality of the call from 0 to 9.
So we had an awesome call with him.
Thank you for improving our customer service.
So I've given him a 9 out of 9 because it was an amazing experience. So you can choose the frequency that you ask those questions if you ask those at all. But obviously we can attach that metadata so that we can see agents' performances and what sort of experiences your clients or your callers are getting. Okay, so and Pete, from your perspective, that you're just using your Teams client, and you would have hopefully seen that came from UCC Andy when it popped your Teams toast on your client. Is that right?
It did, but I actually answered it on my mobile.
Okay, even better. Good example of mobile agile working. Okay, so let's show you what it looks like from an agent's perspective. So let's try and show you again another call. We'll put another call in this time. I'll choose Teams.
Welcome to the pensions regulator. This conversation will be recorded for training purposes.
We'll choose Team support
You
this
have
time.
chosen team support. One moment, please.
You
Your
can see
call
it's now
will be
ringing my
answered by
agent.
the next available representative.
Okay, so now we've got, because we've recognized the CLI of my mobile phone number, it's matched that to a contact card in Dynamics that I've got with Andy Whiteside's details in there. I can see some previous history. I can see any open cases. So you can see the last call that came in to this contact center. They chose the pensions regulator. The agent they connected to was Pete Basie, and he was 100% skilled. We had a conversation, and then that resulted in a 9 out of 9 score for this particular agent. I can also see any previous calls that we've had through the timeline. This doesn't have to connect to a CRM, so this could be that if we get a one call from a mobile phone, we'll build that history up from there, so you can see how many times that person's called before. Obviously, if they've made multiple calls into the organisation, you can from here as well attach some metadata so that we can then go and review what our calls are about or what the status is of the agent's calls that they're taking, and then that will build that into the database that we've got. And again, this is sat in the Teams client. So I'll hang up this call.
From 0 to 9.
I'll do this one as a 2.
Thank you for improving our customer service.
Okay, so that's really shown you a couple of versions in terms of the agent experience. What we're also seeing a lot of is the ability for agents to sit in a CRM system. So what we've got here is the ability to put in a window of the contact center into the CRM environment. Now, let's move this out of the way. Might be a bit further down there. So now we've got our CRM. So this is Dynamics. We can have our standard view, but then we can extend this with contact center capability. So I'm going to send a message in to my contact center as a WhatsApp message. So you might want to have different communication methods available. So I'm just typing a message from my mobile phone in WhatsApp, and I'm going to present that into the contact center. You can see that message has just come through as a WhatsApp. So as an agent, I can click on this. If I'm in a different contact card, it will automatically flick to the relevant one if you need to do that. I can also, as an agent, then have the ability to decline, transfer, or accept, and we'll accept this one. You can also see how many times you presented a message to an agent, and that can be reported upon so that we can see how agents are performing, the states that they're in, and that sort of stuff. So I now can have a conversation here, and directly from my CRM client be able to have that communication and see any information that's relevant in the contact card. I've also got some controls of the buttons at the bottom on here, where we can quickly sort of utilize the back office system and integration that we've got to present the information that you might need. I can build a list of predefined responses, that if we've got similar requests, we could go and reply to those without having to rekey all the time. I can also see some contact information, so that will pull up the contact card information, as well as you can see it within here. I can see the timeline, again similar to the other view, and then I can look at any open cases, or I might be able to classify how that would look in that environment as well. When I've handled that case, so let me just turn that back, and then I can manage that conversation all the way through until I handle that, and I can again, I can classify that call if I need to, and then handle it, and then I can apply a wrap-up time, or I can take my wrap-off time down from there if you need to as well. So that's just really giving you a high-level view on some of the things that are involved in our system. What we can do is build some logic into the call flows, so we can monitor what's happening. We can show you, we can follow some rules if we want to notify people of changes within the contact center, for example. So I might want to build some notifications around some SLAs or some KPIs. If we're busy and we have to wait for longer than 60 seconds, I might want to send a message to all the agents that we're really busy by instant message or email. It might be that if we're looking at a KPI for our SLA, which is to answer calls within a certain time frame, that we want to send an email out to all of the supervisors to say we're not hitting it, we need to get some more people. And you can build that logic within the core product. We can start to apply other elements of your Microsoft ecosystem through Power Automate or through Flow to quickly enhance what the experience might be for those contact center environments. So we really can utilize the investment we've already made in your licenses so that you can get the best advantage from this. I'm conscious that we've got a little bit of time, so I wanted to show you a little bit around reporting. So there's two ways we can use SQL Server reporting. We see a lot more requirement for Power BI now, so I'll show you both of those interfaces, and then you can have whichever tool you need, and again, depend on what skills you've got from in your internal organizations, or obviously this is something that Modality can help you with as well. So this is SQL Server reporting. This gives you an idea of the data that we're trying to hunt for. So whether it's per UCC, whether it's a time frame that we're looking for, whether it's inbound, outbound, which modality we're talking about, and then we've pre-built some reports that you can go and view that data in. So let's give you an example of the agent report. So what we want to do is go and have a look. So my Teams client is this one. Let's go and have a look at the activity for this particular agent. Okay, so this is probably the call. So I can see at a high level the sorts of traffic the agent's got. We can see that's an inbound call. It was hunted successfully. We've got a call recording associated to it, and this is the time in which it took place. I can drill down and get a really granular view on exactly what's happened as part of that dialogue. So again, I can see what's happened here. Call came in, chose Teams. There's nobody else in the queue. We hunted an agent, and that agent was hunted successfully. That was Andy. We had a call. We got a quality score of 2. This is where the recording is stored in SharePoint, and we've classified that as a misbin collection. So you can see a real granular level down to, you know, every sort of component piece of what's happened through that journey. We also took a call, or Pete took a call for me on my behalf. So there should have been an entry written to my database. There we go. You can see there, even though Pete doesn't work for Anywhere 365, he has taken a call on behalf of the pensions regulator for us. So we can see that that call came in. It was an inbound call. It was hunting successfully. Here's a recording, and again, some high-level information on who the agent was. But I can see, again, a full granular level of exactly what happened. So we chose the pensions regulator. We hunted Pete. We accepted. We had a conversation. Got a quality monitor score of 9, and then this is where the recording is in SharePoint. If you've got the right permissions, you can also download the recording from here, and that will show that even though Pete was on his Teams client in his own environment, we've still been able to take a recording of that. Don't know if you can hear that, but that's the conversation between Pete and I. So. And again, you can report on all of those legacies. We in effect build a conference. So rather than it being a multi-legged call that we lose track of, we can keep all of that in one place so that we've got that audit trail for all of those conversations. Let's just show you what that looks like in our Power BI environment. So we see a lot more of this at the moment. The easy interface from a Power BI perspective, being able to use a widget-based approach from this side. We've got the similar reports that you would have in the SQL version, but obviously you can click down into to the level of detail that you want in these environments to see exactly what you need. I can see all of the presented information that I would see. Most of this is well, all of this is out of the box, so this is what you would get. The great thing about Power BI is that you can overlay different data sources. So if we're looking at a heat map, for example, of when we're busy, this is a good view from a contact center perspective, but actually we might want to overlay this with HR information. How many agents did we have available? Is there something else that might have influenced the activity within the contact center that day? And we could bring those elements into this so that the management information that you need and you need to report back on is easily acceptable and easily delivered to the people that want it. So I've probably done a whistle-stop tour of the high-level features. One of the things that we really are seeing an awful lot more of is bringing in automation wherever possible and utilizing other systems to be able to deliver those automated self-serve type options. And we have another element in our latest version of software that allows you to easily integrate back office systems in a sort of low code, no code environment to be able to help integrate lots of complex solutions. So what would have been quite a complex IVR type development world in the old Mitel, Avaya, Cisco environments is very different now in our approach. And we within our Dialog Studio, we've got a much simpler way to be able to sort of graphically connect different systems together and give you that experience at a much lower price point that allows you to sort of interact much more effectively than we would have done before. I'm conscious that we're getting probably towards the end of my slot. Has anybody got any questions at this point?
I did. One of the things, it's probably just more of a to mention, but one of the things that we're seeing a fair amount of interest in is the hook into the cognitive services around translation on chat. Is that something you can demo on this platform, or is that not on this one?
I haven't got that on this one, but that is something that we can definitely do on another session if somebody wants to see that. We built quite a few demo environments in the last couple of weeks or so where we've done exactly that. So looking for back-end systems that could facilitate initial inquiries through a bot, and then being able to to go and hook into a back-end database and try and deliver some of those immediate questions. Once that gets exhausted, then that could be put into a queue either from a voice perspective or from a chat perspective.
Yeah, I think the one we're seeing a lot on is if you have a very diverse sort of culture and languages that you support within your citizenry, then somebody who messages in potentially for a live chat, if they start sort of typing in French or Spanish or whatever it may be, the agent receiving that message will get that message translated into English. They can reply in English and it will translate it back into the detected language. So that's actually a really nice way of doing it.
We do auto detection, and that will know the default language of the agent, and it will also pick up what that inbound text is written in. We've seen that a lot in the Welsh language, so we've done quite a bit of work with Welsh organisations that want to preserve the language. So I think that there's always a question at the start of whether somebody wants to communicate in Welsh or English. The idea is, from a protection perspective, that if somebody chooses Welsh as their preferred language, then obviously you need that Welsh skill at the back end to be able to communicate with that, even though maybe it's only 5% of the communication that needs that. So that really helps organisations that don't or have a shortage of those skills to be able to at least. So that is possible in a text-based chat window at the moment. The language prompt set for Welsh in the spoken word I don't think exists yet. I think there's about 60 odd languages that are off the shelf for the Microsoft environment currently. But yeah, we're seeing an awful lot of that actually, because it's quite a difficult thing from a resource perspective to fulfill.
Thanks for that, Andy. Yeah, in fact, I was going to ask. I mean, that neatly falls into one of the questions I had was around the accessibility and transcribing and translating, but I think you've pretty much covered that now. So yeah, thank you for that.
Transcription services are similar, I think. What we do is we record a call, we'll put it through that recording through a platform as a service for transcription. So the sales organisation I mentioned earlier, they realised their sales guys were pretty awful at updating their CRM system when they were travelling. So what they did is they recorded the call. That call then got put through a transcription service, and then that transcript got deposited in to the CRM system, so that there was an audit trail of the the conversations, even if the sales guy was not able to do that whilst he was traveling. So some neat uses of the way that technology could work.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I've never seen the demo in quite as much detail as that, and yeah, I was quite flabbergasted that it goes into quite so much detail that it does, and also uses dynamics in the way that it does as well, because a lot of the customers on this call will probably have dynamics, and it can absolutely start to leverage those licenses as well. And one of the questions that we've had in, Andy, is what might you suggest by way of workforce management as an additional functionality, and could this integrate in any way with the solution?
Okay, so workforce management is something that we don't provide, but we do provide hooks into other systems. So if you've already invested in a WFM solution, then we can usually present our information into that workforce management system. So I think we've done some work with Verint and Injectio and a few others that might be the ones that people have been used to.
Right. Okay. I think that pretty much answers that. So a bit like the Pete question earlier, that it's a case of just understanding, requirements, what customers have got in terms of existing infrastructure, and then trying to map in, where you've got hooks into other organisations and other solutions, in order that we can just understand how we can hook into that.
Yep.
And so a lot of the customers on the call will have a cloud only strategy, that they're looking at moving everything to the cloud. Is there anything on here to do with Anywhere 365 that needs to be on premise, or can it all be hosted in Azure on the Teams tenant, and basically 100% cloud?
Typically, we use direct routing as our way of connecting. So there will be some connectivity between the local SBC and then the SBC in our cloud service. Pete, I don't know if you want to put any meat around the bones on that in terms of the offer that you guys would normally come forward with.
Yeah. So again, it will come back to what sort of architecture you want and what sort of architecture we need from the beginning. But we need to take into account that when we're talking telephony and we're talking contact center, if we are talking about two separate items, then your telephony can go off into the direct routing component like we talked about earlier on, and potentially your PSTN, your SIP services, or whatever it may be, can be delivered directly into the contact center solution. So we can do it that way. Alternatively, if you do have your direct routing coming in to a session border controller, and all of your contact center numbers and your normal DDI numbers are all part of one large range, then we can use that session border controller to route the contact center numbers specifically off into the contact center platform. So it doesn't need to change the architectures that you have, but again, it will just be a case of how much traffic are we putting through, and making sure that we're not making your normal telephony or the contact center telephony do any overly complicated routes to get to where they need to. So yeah, we can certainly take routes directly straight into Workstream people, or we can use a session border controller to do some manipulation of which calls go to the contact center and which calls go to the Teams platform as standard telephony. So yeah, we can be sensible about that.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. And anything else from you, Andy?
No, I don't think so. I think typically our Teams deployments are utilizing our Dialog Cloud, and again, it's how we connect the local telephony to that. And then really, if you think about the other component pieces, that they're using SharePoint online, and they're using the SQL instance in Azure normally, and that's how all of that is managed within a localized area within that environment. So yeah, it just makes it very simple from a licensing perspective.
Great, thanks a lot for that. So I think I'll call a halt to this call. I'd just like to extend my sincere thanks to the Modality guys for putting this together. Really appreciate it. Andy, yeah, thanks so much for doing the demo on Anywhere 365. So to everyone on the call, I'll be reaching out to you just to find out what your thoughts are on what we've shown you today, both good and bad, and just to understand whether or not it's something that you want to look into, or whether or not you're just a lot more knowledgeable than what you were probably 2 hours ago. So yeah, I really appreciate your time. That is such a busy time for you guys at the moment. Andy, Pete, do you want to say anything, last words before we call it a day?
From me, just I think we've tried to squeeze an awful lot into a short period of time. I think that there's normally a lot of questions that come out of this, so more than happy to engage in some further sessions if there's other things that you want to look at in more detail. Yeah, we'll just reach out and we can organise something to do that for you. But I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, and I think from my side, likewise, Paul Morgan is your account director. He's on here, so we can share his information as and when you need it. But realistically, I think with the environments we've worked in and the sort of solutions we've put in, if you think that you can't do telephony or you need some help with doing telephony, come and have a chat with us, because it is more than likely that we can find the ways of delivering it.
Great, thanks, Pete. So we've got another session next week on the mainly around the governance that Modality can help with on the Teams element, and the adoption and change management as well. So guys, please stay safe, and yeah, we'll look forward to hooking up with you next week. Okay, many thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all.